In the small, quiet town of Peel, Wisconsin, a family home became the scene of an unthinkable crime. It was a place where nothing ever happened, until one fateful morning when police arrived to check on a family that had gone silent. Inside, they made a gruesome discovery. 2 bodies. A mother, brutally stabbed. A stepfather, shot in the head. The air was thick with the metallic scent of blood, and the home's eerie silence was broken only by the muffled cries of young children, locked inside a bedroom. But what truly sent shockwaves through the town, and later, the entire country, was not just the crime itself. It was who was responsible. At the center of it all stood a 17-year-old girl. A girl with a secret life, an obsession with horror, and a past no one truly understood. What drove her to commit such an act? Was it cold-blooded murder or something far more complex? What unfolded in the investigation would reveal dark secrets, hidden abuse, and a chilling online persona that blurred the line between fiction and reality. The courtroom would become a battlefield between those who saw her as a remorseless killer and those who believed she was a victim who had no way out. What really happened inside that house? And was justice truly served? Stay tuned as we unravel the shocking case of Ashlee Martinson. But before we dive in, make sure to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you don't miss any of our deep dive true crime stories. Let's get into it. The Oneida County Sheriff's Department was first alerted when a concerned friend of Ashlee Martinson reported unsettling online messages. She had stopped responding abruptly, and something felt off. Deputies arrived at the secluded home on March 7, 2015, unaware of the nightmare awaiting them. The house was eerily still. No signs of forced entry. No immediate sounds of distress. But as officers stepped inside, a suffocating sense of unease filled the air. Then, they found the bodies. Jennifer Ayers, 40, lay lifeless on the floor. Blood pooled beneath her, the sheer brutality of the attack evident in the deep wounds across her body. Investigators counted over 30 stab wounds, each a frenzied, deliberate strike. It wasn't a quick death. It was personal. Nearby, Thomas Ayers, 37, was slumped in a chair. A single shotgun blast to the head had ended his life instantly. Unlike Jennifer's prolonged suffering, this was swift. Execution style. Officers moved cautiously through the house, their weapons drawn, expecting an attacker to still be inside. But what they found next was even more unsettling. 3 children, aged 2, 8, and 9, were discovered inside a locked room. The oldest spoke through the door, terrified. They had been inside for hours. When officers broke in, the children clung to them, confused and afraid. They had no idea their parents were dead just feet away. They only knew that Ashlee had told them to stay put. Now, she was gone. The house became a crime scene. Bloodstains marked the walls, the carpet. The weapon, a 12-gauge shotgun, was left behind. A knife lay nearby, its blade coated in drying crimson. Investigators tried to reconstruct what had happened, but nothing made sense. There were no signs of forced entry, no reports of intruders. The victims hadn't been robbed. This wasn't random. It was deliberate, calculated. As law enforcement processed the scene, a chilling realization took hold. The only person missing from the home? Ashlee Martinson. The hunt for a teenage killer had begun. To the outside world, Ashlee Martinson appeared like any other teenage girl. She was smart, articulate, and had a sharp sense of humor. Teachers noted her intelligence, while friends saw her as kind but withdrawn. She wasn't the type to cause trouble, at least, not openly. But beneath her quiet demeanor, a much darker side was emerging. Ashlee had a fascination with horror, death, and violence. She ran an online blog under the alias Vampchick, where she wrote gruesome poetry and short stories. The themes were chilling: murder, torture, suffering. In one entry, she described the exhilaration of taking a life, detailing the feeling of blood on her hands. Some dismissed it as nothing more than creative expression. Others would later wonder if it was a warning sign. She gravitated toward the macabre, consuming films and books that explored brutality in graphic detail. Slasher flicks and crime thrillers weren't just entertainment, they were an obsession. Yet, in her real life, Ashlee wasn't the villain of a horror story, she was, in her own words, a victim. According to her, the home she lived in was anything but safe. She later claimed that her stepfather, Thomas Ayres, was a violent, abusive man. His past was riddled with convictions for kidnapping and sexual assault. She alleged that he controlled every aspect of her life, leaving her in a constant state of fear. Her mother, Jennifer Ayres, wasn't just a bystander. Ashlee believed her mother chose to ignore what was happening. The betrayal cut deep. If the one person who was supposed to protect her refused to, what options did she have left? As Ashlee grew older, her desperation intensified. She longed for escape, for a way out of the nightmare she was trapped in. But running away wasn't easy, especially when she had younger siblings to think about. Instead, she found solace in the only place she could, her imagination. In the digital world, she could be whoever she wanted. On the surface, she was a horror enthusiast. But was it simply an outlet for her pain, or was it feeding something even more dangerous? People who knew her wrestled with conflicting emotions. Some said she was misunderstood, a teenager seeking an escape from a reality she couldn't endure. Others saw something unsettling, a girl who harbored thoughts far darker than anyone realized. Her life was a storm of contradictions. Victim or monster? Helpless or dangerous? The truth would soon unravel in ways no one expected. With two bodies lying lifeless in the house and her younger siblings locked away, Ashlee Martinson knew she couldn't stay. Panic set in. The walls were closing around her. She needed to disappear, fast. She grabbed a bag, stuffed it with essentials, and met up with her 22-year-old boyfriend, Ryan Sisko. Together, they fled the quiet town of Peel, crossing state lines in a frantic attempt to outrun what had just happened. Their destination? Indiana. Ashlee had convinced Ryan that they needed to leave immediately, but she didn't tell him the full story. He had no idea about the carnage she had left behind. For a brief moment, she thought she might get away. She thought she could start over. But law enforcement was already closing in. Back in Wisconsin, investigators were piecing together the crime scene. With Ashlee missing and her siblings giving little insight into what had happened, authorities feared the worst. Was she a kidnapped victim? An accomplice? Or the mastermind? It didn't take long for them to track her movements. A warrant was issued, and within 24 hours, she and Ryan were located at a motel in Indiana. When officers stormed the room, Ashlee didn't fight. No resistance. No emotion. She was taken into custody without incident. As Ashlee Martinson faced the legal system, her case ignited a fierce debate. Prosecutors painted her as a cold, calculated killer, while the defense argued she was a victim of years of abuse who saw no other way out. The evidence against her. She confessed to both murders. The brutal nature of the crime, especially the 30-plus stab wounds inflicted on her mother. Her horror-themed blog, Vampchick, filled with violent fantasies. The attempt to flee, suggesting premeditation rather than self-defense. The defense's argument. Ashlee had endured years of physical and emotional abuse at the hands of her stepfather. Her mother ignored the abuse and allowed it to continue. On the day of the murders, Ashlee claimed she feared for her life. She had nowhere to turn. Her escape was not a calculated getaway but an act of a scared teenager in shock. As the case gained national attention, public opinion was deeply divided. Was she a murderer or a survivor? Rather than face a possible life sentence for first-degree murder, Ashlee accepted a plea deal. She pleaded guilty to second-degree homicide and false imprisonment of her siblings. The sentence? 23 years in prison. For some, justice was served. Others believed the system had failed her, punishing a victim rather than protecting her. As Ashlee was led out of the courtroom, she was no longer the horror-obsessed teenager behind a computer screen. She was now inmate number 648214. Ryan, confused and shaken, was also arrested but was later cleared of any involvement in the killings. He had been running with a fugitive without even knowing it. Ashlee's escape had lasted barely a day. Now, she wasn't just a girl on the run. She was a murder suspect facing a lifetime behind bars. Back in custody, Ashlee Martinson sat in an interrogation room, silent, unreadable. Detectives pressed her for answers, trying to understand what had led to the gruesome crime that had stunned their small town. At first, she refused to talk. She avoided eye contact, her face a mask of indifference. But as hours passed, the weight of the situation became unbearable. She broke. In a calm, almost detached voice, Ashlee confessed. She admitted to shooting her stepfather in the head with a shotgun. She described how, in the aftermath, her mother came at her in a fit of rage. That's when she grabbed a knife. With chilling clarity, she recounted stabbing Jennifer Ayres more than 30 times. Over and over. Each strike fueled by a lifetime of anger, fear, and betrayal. But the story didn't end there. Ashlee painted a picture of a home filled with abuse, control, and violence. She claimed her stepfather had tormented her for years. That her mother had let it happen. That this wasn't a crime of malice, but one of desperation. Investigators listened, but they weren't entirely convinced. Was she a victim who finally snapped? Or was she a cold-blooded killer who had long fantasized about murder? Adding to the complexity was her online presence. Her horror blog, Vampchick, became key evidence in the case. Her violent writings, her obsession with bloodshed, did they foreshadow the killings? Prosecutors certainly thought so. Meanwhile, the community was divided. Some saw Ashlee as a tragic figure, a teenager pushed to her breaking point. Others believed she had planned this, that she wanted to kill. One thing was clear, whatever happened inside that house wasn't just an act of rage, it was a reckoning years in the making. Locked away in a Wisconsin prison, Ashlee Martinson's life took a drastic turn. No longer a teenager immersed in horror fantasies, she was now an inmate, forced to confront the reality of her actions. In prison interviews, her demeanor changed. She spoke less about the crime and more about finding peace. She expressed remorse for what had happened, though some remained skeptical. She turned to education, counseling, and self-reflection. She no longer identified with her former online persona, Vampchick. Instead, she claimed she was working to heal from the past that had led her to that moment. Meanwhile, her case continued to stir controversy. Some believed she had been unfairly sentenced, arguing that the legal system failed to consider the depth of her alleged abuse. Others insisted her crime was too brutal to justify a lesser punishment. With more than a decade still ahead of her sentence, Ashlee's future remains uncertain. Will she ever find redemption? Or will her past forever define her? One thing is undeniable, her story remains one of tragedy, violence, and unanswered questions. Even behind prison walls, Ashlee Martinson's story refuses to fade. Her name lingers in true crime discussions, courtrooms, and households where people argue over the same question. Was she a desperate teenager fighting for survival, or a remorseless killer hiding behind a tragic past? The debate rages on. Some say Ashlee was a girl with no way out. They point to the years of alleged abuse, the fear, the helplessness. To them, her actions were not murder but a final, desperate act of escape. They argue the justice system failed to protect her when she needed it most, and when she finally took matters into her own hands, it punished her instead. But others see something far more sinister. A girl who didn't just kill, she slaughtered. Over 30 stab wounds, an execution-style shotgun blast. A chilling blog filled with violent fantasies. And when it was over, she didn't turn herself in. She ran. Justice or misjudgment? Survival or savagery? Today, Ashlee Martinson remains behind bars, her fate sealed by a plea deal that spared her a lifetime sentence. She speaks of growth, reflection, and remorse, but the world beyond the prison gates remains skeptical. Is redemption possible for someone who has taken 2 lives? The verdict is no longer in the hands of a courtroom, it's in the hands of those who hear her story. What do you believe? Share your thoughts in the comments. Subscribe for more true crime stories that challenge everything you think you know.